Penelope Hart was supposed to marry a monster that morning in 1842. Instead, she hid inside a stranger's carriage, trembling beneath a velvet blanket, certain she would be discovered and dragged back to the asylum her uncle had waiting. What she did not know was that the man whose carriage she had invaded would become the only person she would ever truly love, that his cold, careful world would shatter the moment he found her. That sometimes the most desperate escape leads straight into the arms of destiny, and that the Duke of Wallace Grey was about to meet the woman who would make him forget every rule he ever lived by. The morning light fell cold through the tall windows of Ashwood Manor, casting long shadows across the marble floors where Penelope Hart stood motionless in her dressing room. 26 years of carefully measured steps, properly folded hands, and swallowed words had led her to this moment. Her wedding dress hung before her like a white ghost, its silk and lace catching the pale English sun. She should have felt something. Joy, perhaps. Fear, certainly. But all Penelope felt was the familiar numbness that had settled into her bones since her parents died 8 years ago, leaving her in the cold custody of her uncle Henry Hart. Mrs. Collins, her former governess, and the only person in this house who had ever shown her genuine kindness, moved quietly around the room, her weathered hands trembling as she adjusted the veil. The old woman had been dismissed 3 months ago, supposedly for being too old to serve properly, but she had insisted on returning today, on being present for this final morning. Penelope watched her reflection in the mirror, dark curls pinned into elaborate coils, green eyes that once sparkled with curiosity now dull and resigned. She looked like a woman preparing for her own funeral. Mrs. Collins stepped closer, her fingers cold as they fastened a pearl necklace around Penelope's throat. Then, so quickly Penelope almost missed it, the governess pressed something small into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Do not open it now," Mrs. Collins whispered, her voice barely audible. "Wait until I leave the room. Then read it. And for the love of God, child, believe every word." Before Penelope could respond, her uncle's voice boomed from the hallway, announcing that Lord Raymond Hale had arrived and wished to see his bride before the ceremony. Mrs. Collins squeezed her hand once more and hurried from the room, leaving Penelope alone with the folded paper burning against her palm. She waited until the footsteps faded. Then, with shaking hands, she unfolded the note. The handwriting was rushed, the ink smudged in places where Mrs. Collins had clearly been crying as she wrote. But the words were clear enough. "My dearest Penelope, last night I could not sleep and went to the kitchen for tea. I heard voices in your uncle's study. The door was not fully closed. I heard everything. They plan to declare you incompetent immediately after the wedding. Lord Raymond has already paid 3 doctors to sign documents stating you are mentally unstable. Your uncle has arranged a private asylum in the north. They intend to have you committed within the week. Once you are there, they will control your mother's inheritance, the fund she left you, the one that becomes yours at marriage or at age 30. They have been planning this for months. Raymond's previous wives both died under mysterious circumstances shortly after changing their wills in his favor. You are in terrible danger. If you walk into that chapel today, you may never walk out free again. Please, please, my darling girl, run." The paper slipped from Penelope's fingers and drifted to the floor. The room tilted. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Every carefully constructed defense she had built around herself crumbled in an instant, leaving only raw, primal terror. She thought of Lord Raymond Hale, with his cold grey eyes and the way his smile never quite reached them. She thought of how he had courted her with mechanical precision, never showing affection, only possession. She thought of her Uncle Henry, who had treated her like an inconvenient expense since the day her parents died, always calculating, always waiting for her to become profitable. And she thought of the inheritance, £20,000, held in trust by her mother's solicitor, to be released only when she married or reached the age of 30. The money that had made her a target. The fortune that had painted a price on her freedom. The door handle turned. Penelope moved without thinking, snatching the note from the floor and shoving it into the pocket of her dressing gown. Mrs. Collins entered again, this time with a simple grey travelling dress draped over her arm and a small cloth bag clutched in her other hand. "There is a servant's passage behind the tapestry in your mother's old room," Mrs. Collins said, her voice steady now with purpose. "It leads to the garden. I have put food and water in this bag, and money. Everything I have saved in 40 years of service. It is not much, but it might buy you a coach ticket somewhere. Anywhere but here. I cannot take your savings," Penelope whispered, but Mrs. Collins was already pulling the wedding dress from her shoulders, replacing it with the plain grey wool. "You can, and you will," the old woman said firmly. "Your mother was good to me when no one else was. Let me be good to you now. Let me save you the way I should have saved you from this arrangement in the first place." Penelope's hands moved automatically, fastening buttons, pulling on stockings, sliding her feet into practical leather boots. Her mind was racing. Where would she go? Who would help her? Any respectable family would return her to her uncle the moment she appeared on their doorstep. A woman of her station could not simply vanish into the streets of London without causing scandal. "The scandal does not matter if you are dead," Mrs. Collins said, as if reading her thoughts. "And make no mistake, child, that asylum will be your grave, even if your body keeps breathing for years inside it." From somewhere below, Penelope heard the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. The guests were arriving. Soon someone would come to fetch her for the ceremony. Soon it would be too late. She grabbed the cloth bag and followed Mrs. Collins through the corridors of Ashwood Manor, moving through shadows she had known her entire life. Past her father's old study, where books still lined the shelves gathering dust. Past the drawing room where her mother had played piano on Sunday evenings. Past every memory of the life she had once believed would be hers forever. They reached her mother's bedroom. Mrs. Collins pushed aside the heavy tapestry on the east wall, revealing a narrow door Penelope had never noticed before. "Go quickly," Mrs. Collins said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Go far, and do not trust anyone who claims they want to help you. Trust only yourself, now." Penelope embraced her, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and soap, knowing she might never see this dear woman again. Then she stepped through the door into darkness. The passage was narrow and cold, the stone walls rough against her palms as she felt her way forward. Behind her she heard Mrs. Collins replace the tapestry, heard the heavy door click shut. Ahead, a thin line of daylight marked the exit. She pushed through into the morning air. The garden stretched before her, dewy and green in the early light. Beyond the hedge, she could see the edge of the estate where the road began. The road that could take her anywhere. The road that might lead to freedom or might lead to something worse. From the front of the house, she heard voices rising in confusion. Someone had discovered her empty dressing room. Someone was calling her name. Penelope gathered her skirts and ran. Her boots pounded against the soft earth as she raced across the lawn toward the gate. Her breath burned in her chest. The cloth bag banged against her hip with each stride. Behind her, the voices grew louder, more urgent. She heard her uncle shouting orders. She heard horses being readied. She reached the stone wall that marked the boundary of Ashwood Manor and scrambled over it, the rough stones scraping her palms. She landed hard on the other side, stumbled, caught herself, and kept running. The dirt road stretched before her, empty and exposed. She had no plan beyond this moment, no destination, no allies. She was a gently bred woman running through the English countryside in a servant's dress, with stolen coins in her pocket and terror driving every step. The sound of hoofbeats echoed behind her, growing closer. Penelope veered off the main road onto a smaller path that cut through a dense wood. Branches caught at her dress and hair. Her legs ached. Her lungs screamed for air. But she did not stop, could not stop. If they caught her now, they would drag her back. They would say she was hysterical, unstable. They would use this very escape as proof of her madness. And by nightfall, she would be locked in that asylum with no one to hear her screams and no hope of rescue. She burst from the trees onto another road and nearly collided with a carriage stopped at the side, its horses being tended by a coachman and a young groom. The vehicle was magnificent, all polished black wood and brass fittings, with a coat of arms painted on the door that she vaguely recognized but could not place. The hoofbeats grew louder behind her. Penelope did not think, did not plan. She simply acted on pure instinct born of absolute desperation. She ran to the carriage, yanked open the door, and threw herself inside. The interior was empty, all rich leather and dark velvet. She dropped to the floor between the seats, pulled a traveling blanket over herself, and pressed her hand against her mouth to muffle her ragged breathing. Through the thin walls of the carriage, she heard the horses thunder past on the road, their riders shouting to each other. They were searching for her, hunting her like an animal. The sounds faded into the distance. Penelope lay perfectly still beneath the blanket, every muscle tensed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The coachman was still working on the horse's hoof just outside. Any moment now, someone would open the door, someone would discover her, someone would drag her out and demand answers she could not give. But minutes passed, and no one came. Finally, she heard the coachman call out that the repair was finished, heard footsteps approaching the carriage, heard a deep male voice respond from somewhere nearby, a voice that was cultured and calm and carried the unmistakable authority of nobility. "No need to hurry, Davis. I'm in no particular rush to return to Greyhaven." The name struck something in Penelope's memory. Greyhaven Hall, the estate of the Duke of Wallace Grey, somewhere in Kent, one of the most powerful men in England. And she had just hidden herself in his carriage like a common criminal. The door opened. Someone climbed in. The carriage dipped slightly under the weight. Penelope held her breath, certain she would be discovered at any moment, certain this mad escape would end before it truly began. But the door closed again. The carriage lurched into motion, and as the wheels began to turn, carrying her away from Ashwood Manor and everything she had ever known, Penelope Hart realized she had just traded one impossible situation for another. She was trapped in a moving carriage with a duke she had never met, running from a wedding that would have destroyed her, toward a future she could not begin to imagine. And somewhere behind her, the chapel bells began to ring for a bride who would never arrive. The carriage rocked and swayed as it rolled along the country road, every bump sending fresh waves of panic through Penelope's body. She lay curled beneath the traveling blanket on the floor between the seats, breathing in expensive tobacco and something masculine that made her acutely aware she was trespassing in a stranger's private space. Above her, mere inches away, sat the owner of this carriage. She could hear the rustle of fabric as he shifted position, the soft sound of pages turning. He was reading, completely unaware that a desperate woman lay hidden at his feet. Penelope tried to control her breathing, to make herself small and silent. Every muscle ached from holding still, but she dared not move. Not yet. The carriage hit a deep rut, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out as her shoulder slammed against the wooden base. "Everything all right in there, Your Grace," the coachman called. "Perfectly fine, Davis. Though I suspect this road has not been properly maintained in some time." His voice was deeper than she expected, with calm authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Her legs cramped. The air under the blanket grew stale and warm. Several times she nearly gasped aloud when the carriage lurched, but each time she managed to hold on, to remain silent and hidden. What would he do when he discovered her? He might think her a thief, might have her arrested, might send word to her uncle. A duke had no reason to help a stranger who had invaded his property. How much farther to the next posting in, Davis? "Another hour at this pace, Your Grace. The Swan and Crown in Maidstone is the closest suitable establishment." "Very well. We shall stop there for a proper meal and fresh horses." The carriage began to slow. Through the walls, Penelope heard sounds of civilization growing louder, voices calling out, other vehicles passing, the clatter of activity. Her breathing quickened. This was it, the moment when everything would fall apart. The carriage stopped. She heard the coachman climbing down, voices greeting the Duke, footsteps moving away. Then, blessed silence. Penelope waited, counting heartbeats. When she was certain no one was immediately nearby, she shifted, trying to ease the cramping in her legs. The blanket caught on something. She tugged gently. It did not budge. She pulled harder, and suddenly the blanket was yanked away, flooding her hiding place with afternoon light. Penelope blinked up into the face of a man staring down at her with complete shock. The Duke of Wallace Grey was younger than she imagined, perhaps 34, with dark hair that fell slightly too long over his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic bones, handsome in a severe, almost forbidding way. Dark wool and crisp linen spoke of meticulous care. At this moment, however, his composure had entirely deserted him. For several long seconds, neither moved nor spoke. Then Penelope scrambled upright, nearly hitting her head, and held up both hands in desperate pleading. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Please, sir, I can explain. I swear I am not a thief. I'm not mad. I was only trying to escape and your carriage was there and I had nowhere else to go and they were chasing me. Stop." The Duke's voice cut through her frantic words. "Just stop talking for a moment and let me think." Penelope pressed her lips together, trembling. She watched as he studied her face, taking in her disheveled appearance, the servant's dress hanging too large on her frame, the wild desperation in her eyes. His gaze moved to her hands. She looked down and realized her palms were scraped and bleeding from climbing the stone wall. Dark smudges of dirt marked her fingers. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "And why are you hiding in my carriage?" The words tangled on her tongue. How could she possibly explain? "My name is Penelope, just Penelope. I was employed as a companion to an elderly lady, but her nephew made certain unwelcome advances. When I refused him, he threatened to have me dismissed without references. This morning he tried to force himself upon me, and I had no choice but to run. The lie came more easily than expected. Women in service faced such dangers all the time. It was a believable story. But as she watched his face, she realized he did not believe her. Not entirely. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. "You are no lady's companion. Your accent is too educated, your posture too rigid. You were trained from birth to hold yourself a certain way, to speak a certain way. Whatever you are running from, it is not an employer's unwanted advances." Penelope felt her last defense crumble. This man was far too observant. Tears welled in her eyes. "You are right. I am not what I claimed. But please, please, I beg you not to send me back. I cannot go back. If I go back, I will die. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And it will be a slow, terrible death in a place where no one will hear me scream." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. The Duke stood perfectly still. Then, with deliberate care, he climbed fully into the carriage and closed the door. He settled into the seat opposite her, movements measured and controlled. "I am not in the habit of handing desperate women over to their pursuers, nor am I comfortable leaving you stranded with no protection. However, I'm also not inclined to harbor a criminal." Penelope wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. "I have committed no crime. I have only tried to save my own life. From what? From men who wish to steal my inheritance by declaring me insane and locking me away where I cannot protest." The words hung in the air between them. The Duke's expression shifted. Something that might have been anger flickered in his storm-grey eyes. "That is a serious accusation. It is the truth. Can you prove it?" "No. I have nothing but my word. And I realize that is worth very little to a man who does not know me." The Duke was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read the truth written there. Finally, he leaned back and folded his arms. "I am going to make you an offer, Miss Penelope. You will travel with me to my estate at Greyhaven Hall in Kent. You will remain there as my guest for 3 days. During that time, I will make inquiries about your situation and determine whether your story has merit. If I find you have been truthful, I will help you find somewhere safe. If I find you have lied, I will turn you over to the proper authorities." He paused, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Do you accept these terms?" Penelope stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. This stranger was offering her sanctuary, even if only temporarily. "Yes. Yes, I accept. Thank you, Your Grace." The Duke's expression did not soften, but something in his eyes shifted. "Then we have an understanding. But know this, Miss Penelope. I do not tolerate deception in my household. Whatever secrets you are keeping, they will come to light eventually, and when they do, you had better hope they prove you worthy of the trust I am placing in you now." He reached up and knocked twice on the roof, signaling the coachman. As the vehicle lurched back into motion, carrying them toward Greyhaven Hall and an uncertain future, Penelope closed her eyes and allowed herself one small moment of relief. She had bought herself time. 3 days to prove her story. 3 days to convince a cynical duke that she was worth saving. And as the countryside rolled past and afternoon sun slanted through the curtains, Penelope realized something unexpected. She was no longer alone in her fight. For better or worse, the Duke of Wallace Grey had just become the first ally she had found in years. Night had fallen by the time the carriage rolled through the iron gates of Greyhaven Hall. Penelope pressed her face to the window as the estate emerged from darkness like something out of a dream. Lamplights flickered along the drive, illuminating 3 stories of pale stone and tall windows. It was beautiful and imposing in equal measure. Wallace climbed out first, then turned to offer his hand. Penelope hesitated only a moment before accepting it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. A woman appeared in the doorway, grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, dark dress immaculate despite the late hour. She surveyed Penelope with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Turner," Wallace said calmly, "we have an unexpected guest. Please prepare the blue room and see that Miss Penelope has everything she requires." The housekeeper's expression remained neutral. "Of course, Your Grace. Shall I send for a lady's maid? Tomorrow will be soon enough." The entrance hall took Penelope's breath away. Marble floors stretched before her, reflecting dozens of candles in crystal chandeliers. A grand staircase curved upward, portraits of grey ancestors lining the walls. The blue room was on the 2nd floor. Mrs. Turner opened the door to reveal a chamber, larger than Penelope's entire bedroom at Ashwood Manor. Soft blue silk walls, a 4-poster bed with white linens, a fire crackling in the hearth. "I will have hot water sent up immediately, Mrs. Turner said, her tone softening slightly. "And something for you to wear. You look to be about the size of the late Duchess." The housekeeper paused at the door. "His Grace does not often bring guests to Greyhaven, particularly not young women traveling without chaperones or luggage. Whatever your circumstances, Miss Penelope, I hope you appreciate the trust he is placing in you." Servants arrived with a copper tub and steaming water. Penelope waited until alone before sinking into the heat, scrubbing away the dirt from the road. When she emerged, a fine linen nightgown lay on the bed, delicate embroidery at collar and cuffs. She was combing through her damp hair by the fire when a knock came. "Enter," she called, expecting a maid. Wallace stepped into the room. Penelope shot to her feet, suddenly aware she wore only a nightgown, her hair loose and wet around her shoulders. "Your Grace, I was not expecting—" "I apologize for the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you before you retired, to clarify certain matters." She gestured to the chairs by the fire, trying to ignore her racing heart. Wallace settled into one chair. Penelope took the other, conscious of how improper this was. "You told me men wished to steal your inheritance by declaring you insane," Wallace began. "Such a scheme would require careful planning, legal documents, complicit doctors. It is not something done casually." Penelope met his gaze steadily. "The inheritance is substantial, £20,000 left to me by my mother. It was to be released when I married or reached 30. Wallace's eyebrows rose slightly. "That is indeed considerable. And who currently controls this inheritance?" "My uncle, Henry Hart. He has been my guardian since my parents died 8 years ago. And the man you were meant to marry?" "Lord Raymond Hale." She forced herself to say the name without flinching. "He is a widower, twice over. Both previous wives died within a year of marriage, shortly after changing their wills in his favor." The silence that followed was heavy. "And yet your uncle arranged this marriage," Wallace said quietly. "Knowing this history, my uncle and Raymond are business associates. I believe they plan to divide the inheritance once I was declared incompetent and committed." "How do you know this?" "My former governess, Mrs. Collins, overheard them discussing it the night before my wedding. She warned me, helped me escape." Wallace leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You realize how this sounds. A governess who overhears a conversation. A desperate escape. No proof beyond your word." Penelope felt her chest tighten. "I know. But it is the truth." "Then help me understand something." He leaned forward, gaze intense. "Why did you not go to the authorities? To the church, to magistrates, to anyone with power to intervene?" "Because they would not have believed me." Her voice broke slightly. A woman claiming her male relatives wished to harm her, with no evidence beyond a governess's testimony. They would have thought me hysterical. They would have delivered me back to my uncle's custody and called it care. And yet you expect me to believe you." Penelope stood abruptly, moving to the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark glass. "No," she said quietly. "I do not expect you to believe me. I expect you to investigate, as you said you would, to discover the truth for yourself. All I ask is that you look for it before you decide my fate." She turned to face him, eyes shining with unshed tears in the firelight. "I am not asking you to take my word. I'm asking you to give me 3 days to prove I am not the liar or madwoman my uncle would claim me to be." Wallace studied her for a long moment. Then he rose and crossed to where she stood. He was close enough that she could smell sandalwood and leather, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I will tell you what I see, Miss Penelope." His voice was low and measured. "I see a woman who speaks like nobility, but claims to be a servant. I see intelligence in your eyes and breeding in your posture. I see fear, yes, but also determination. And I see someone who is either telling me a horrifying truth or constructing an elaborate deception." "Which do you believe?" she whispered. "I believe that tomorrow I will send word to my solicitor in London. I will ask him to make discreet inquiries about Henry Hart, about Lord Raymond Hale, and about a certain Miss Penelope who was meant to marry yesterday. And I believe that within 3 days I will know exactly who and what you are." His hand moved, almost without seeming to think about it, and tucked a damp curl behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, and sent a shiver down her spine. "Until then," he continued, "you will remain here as my guest. You will be treated with courtesy and respect, but you will understand that you are being watched. Mrs. Turner will keep you within sight. You will not leave the grounds. And you will answer any questions I ask with complete honesty." He stepped back, breaking the spell of proximity. "Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, Your Grace, we do." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. What is your full name? Your real name?" Penelope hesitated only a moment. "Lady Penelope Hart of Ashwood Manor." Something flickered across Wallace's face. "Recognition, perhaps." "I thought as much," he said quietly. "Sleep well, Lady Penelope. Tomorrow we begin searching for the truth." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the weight of everything she had just revealed. Penelope sank back into the chair, legs suddenly weak. She had told him everything, given him her name, her title, enough information to confirm or destroy her story with a few simple inquiries. She had placed her life entirely in the hands of a stranger. And the most terrifying part was that some small foolish part of her wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that the man who had looked at her with such intensity, who had touched her hair with such unexpected gentleness, might actually help her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Penelope pulled the nightgown closer and stared into the fire, wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life or signed her own death warrant. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the blue room, waking Penelope from the first truly restful sleep she had experienced in months. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned with equal measures of relief and anxiety. A soft knock announced a young maid carrying breakfast and a gown draped over her arm. "Good morning, miss. Mrs. Turner thought you might prefer to eat in your room, and she had this altered for you overnight." The dress was deep emerald green, simple but elegant. It fit Penelope perfectly, the fabric settling against her skin like it had been made for her. When she descended to the main floor, Mrs. Turner was waiting in the entrance hall. "His Grace has already departed for London. He left instructions that you are to be made comfortable. The library is at your disposal." The library took Penelope's breath away. 3 walls lined floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines gleaming. Tall windows overlooked the gardens. A massive desk sat near the fireplace, covered with papers and correspondence. She selected a volume of French poetry and settled near the window. But concentration proved impossible. Her thoughts kept returning to Wallace, to the way he had looked at her last night, the gentleness of his touch. "Stop it," she told herself. "He does not trust you. He is investigating you. This is not a romance. This is survival. But her heart refused to listen. It was late afternoon when she heard a carriage in the drive. Her heart leapt. She moved to the window, watching as Wallace emerged. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. The library doors opened. Wallace entered, still wearing his traveling coat. His grey eyes found her immediately. "Lady Penelope, I trust you passed the day comfortably." "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you." He moved to his desk, removing his gloves with deliberate precision. "I spent the day making inquiries as promised." Penelope's hands tightened on the book she held. "And what did you discover?" Wallace looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I discovered that everything you told me was true." The relief that flooded through her was so intense she had to sit down. "I spoke with your family's solicitor, Mr. Edmund Whitmore. He confirmed the existence of your mother's trust fund. Your uncle Henry Hart has indeed been your legal guardian since your parents' death." He paused, jaw tightening. "I also made inquiries about Lord Raymond Hale. His first wife died of sudden illness 6 months after marriage. His second wife fell from a horse 8 months after their wedding. Both women had recently changed their wills, leaving everything to Raymond. No formal investigations were ever conducted." "Because who investigates when a woman dies?" Penelope said bitterly. "Especially when her husband is a lord." Wallace nodded. "I also found your Mrs. Collins. She is living with her sister in Cheapside. She was dismissed without references 3 months ago, but she was willing to provide testimony about what she overheard the night before your wedding." He crossed to where Penelope sat and took the chair opposite her, leaning forward. "She told me that she heard your uncle and Raymond discussing the asylum arrangements in detail, the doctors who had been paid, the documents prepared, the plan to have you declared incompetent within days of the marriage." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "So you believe me now?" "I believe that you were in genuine danger, that the men who were supposed to protect you planned to destroy you instead, and I am deeply, profoundly angry about it." The intensity in his voice surprised her. "No woman should be treated as property to be exploited," he said quietly. "No person should be imprisoned for the convenience of others. What they intended to do to you was evil. What happens now? Now we discuss your options." He stood and moved to the window. "Legally, you are still under your uncle's guardianship until you marry or reach 30. He could attempt to reclaim you. You could remain here as my guest, but that would cause scandal eventually. An unmarried woman living in a bachelor's household. Or?" Penelope prompted. Wallace turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Or we could make the arrangement permanent. We could marry legally and properly. That would immediately end your uncle's guardianship and place you under my protection. Your inheritance would be released and secured under your control, with legal documents ensuring I have no access to it without your explicit permission." Penelope stared at him. "You are proposing marriage? To me? A marriage of convenience. A legal arrangement that would protect you from your uncle and Raymond, while allowing you to maintain control of your own fortune. We would present it to society as a match, arranged quickly but respectably. My status as a duke would shield us from most gossip. But what about you?" Penelope stood, moving toward him. "What about your future? Your chance to marry for love, to have a family with someone you actually choose. I am 34 years old, Lady Penelope. If I were going to marry for love, I suspect I would have done so by now. A wife who requires nothing more than my name and protection seems rather ideal, frankly." The words should have been cold, but the way he was looking at her was anything but detached. "I would not force this on you. If you prefer, I can help you establish yourself elsewhere. A cottage in the countryside. An allowance to live independently until you reach 30. Penelope considered this. Independence. Freedom. But also no Wallace. No more mornings in this beautiful library. No more conversations with a man who looked at her like she was worth protecting. "If we married, what would you expect from me?" "I would expect you to manage the household as a duchess should, to accompany me to necessary social functions, to present a united front to society." He paused, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his features. "I would not expect or demand anything beyond that. Your rooms would be your own. Your life would be your own. This would be a partnership of convenience and mutual benefit, nothing more, nothing more. The words left an odd, hollow feeling in her chest. May I have time to consider? Of course. Take whatever time you need. But Penelope already knew her answer. She had nowhere else to go. And if she was honest, she did not want to leave Greyhaven. Did not want to leave him. Your Grace. Wallace, if I accept this proposal, I want you to know that I do not take it lightly. I understand what you would be sacrificing. As would you, he pointed out. Perhaps, but I was never going to have that anyway. My uncle would have married me to whoever served his purposes. At least with you, I know I will be safe. Respected. Is that enough for you? He asked, something in his voice making her look at him more closely. For now, it is more than enough. Wallace held her gaze. Then he nodded slowly. Then, I will make the arrangements. We can marry within the week, quietly, in the chapel here at Greyhaven. I will handle all the legal documentation to ensure your inheritance is protected, and I will send word to your uncle that any attempt to interfere will be met with the full weight of my title and resources. Thank you. Thank you for believing me, for helping me, for giving me a chance at a life that is actually mine. Wallace crossed the space between them and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. You deserve nothing less, Lady Penelope. And I promise you, as long as you are under my protection, no one will ever harm you again. The conviction in his voice made something warm unfold in her chest. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb brushed absently across her knuckles, and wondered if a marriage of convenience could ever become something more. Wallace seemed to realize what he was doing and released her hand, stepping back with careful formality. I should let you rest. We have much to prepare in the coming days. Wallace, she said, and the name felt intimate on her tongue. He smiled then, a small, genuine expression that transformed his usually severe face. Good night, Penelope. After he left, Penelope sank back into her chair and stared at the fire, her mind whirling. In less than a week, she would be married. To a duke. To a man who had saved her from a terrible fate and asked for nothing in return except partnership. It should have felt like another trap, another cage. Instead, for the first time in years, it felt like hope. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparations. Wallace handled everything with quiet efficiency. Legal documents were drawn up. A special license was obtained. Mrs. Collins was brought to Greyhaven, her eyes filling with tears when she saw Penelope safe. The wedding dress arrived on the 4th day, ivory silk and delicate lace that fit Penelope perfectly. Mrs. Turner supervised the alterations with meticulous care. You will make a beautiful duchess, she said quietly as she pinned the veil in place. On the morning of the wedding, Penelope stood at the window watching the sun rise over the gardens, trying to understand what she was feeling. Not fear, not joy. Something more complicated. Gratitude and uncertainty, and a strange, fluttering hope she did not dare examine. Mrs. Collins came to help her dress, fussing over every detail. Your mother would be proud of you, the old woman said softly. You have survived what would have destroyed many women. Is it wrong that I wish it were more than just protection? Penelope asked quietly. Mrs. Collins smiled knowingly. Give it time, child. I have seen the way His Grace looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The ceremony took place in the small stone chapel on the grounds. Only a handful attended. Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Collins, the estate steward, the local reverend. Wallace stood at the altar in formal dress, his expression composed, but his eyes intense as Penelope walked toward him. She moved down the short aisle with measured steps, her hand trembling as she took her place beside him. The ceremony was brief, traditional words in hushed tones. When the Reverend instructed Wallace to kiss his bride, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers with careful restraint. The kiss was chaste, respectful, lasting only a moment. But Penelope felt it like a shock through her entire body. They signed the register. Mrs. Collins wept, and just like that, Penelope Hart became the Duchess of Wallace Grey. Late that afternoon, a commotion at the front entrance announced unexpected visitors. Penelope was in the drawing room when Wallace entered, his expression dark with controlled anger. Your uncle and Lord Raymond are here. They are demanding to see you. Penelope felt her blood run cold. No, they cannot be here. Not today. They are claiming you were coerced, that you are being held against your will. Wallace's jaw tightened. I need you to be strong now. We will face them together, and we will make it clear that you are here by choice, that you are my wife, legally and properly married. Penelope stood on shaking legs. Wallace crossed to her and took her hand, his grip firm and steadying. I will not let them take you. Do you understand? Whatever they say, whatever they threaten, they have no power here now. They entered the entrance hall together to find Henry Hart and Lord Raymond Hale waiting, both men radiating fury barely contained by social propriety. Penelope, Henry said sharply, what madness is this? Running away on your wedding day like some common— Lady Penelope is now the Duchess of Wallace Grey, Wallace interrupted, his voice like ice. You will address her with the respect her title demands, and you will explain what business brings you to my estate uninvited. Uncle Henry's face flushed red. This is an outrage. She was under my guardianship. Any marriage required my consent. She was of legal age and sound mind. No consent was required. The marriage has been properly witnessed and recorded. Lady Penelope is no longer under your guardianship in any capacity. Raymond stepped forward, his grey eyes fixed on Penelope. Penelope, my dear, he said, in a tone meant to sound concerned. If you have been frightened or confused, if this man has taken advantage of your vulnerable state, you need only say the word. There is nothing to make right, Penelope said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I left Ashwood Manor of my own free will. I married the Duke of Wallace Grey of my own free will, and I have no intention of returning to either of you. You foolish girl, Henry hissed. Do you have any idea what you have done? Wallace took a step forward. I have a witness who overheard your entire conspiracy. I have documentation of payments made to corrupt doctors. I have records of your previous wives' convenient deaths and altered wills. And I have the full support of the legal system should I choose to pursue formal charges against either of you. He paused, his voice dangerously soft. But I will offer you this one opportunity to leave quietly and never contact my wife again. Attempt to interfere with her life and I will destroy both of you with every resource at my disposal. Do we have an understanding? Henry's face had gone pale. Raymond's jaw clenched, his hands fisting at his sides. This is not over, Raymond said quietly. Yes, Wallace replied flatly. It is. He gestured to the footman. These gentlemen are leaving. Please escort them from the property and ensure they are not admitted again. As they were ushered out, Penelope felt her legs give way. Wallace caught her immediately, his arms strong around her waist. I have you. You are safe. They are gone. He led her to the library and settled her into a chair by the fire, then poured 2 glasses of brandy. He pressed one into her hands. Drink. It will help with the shock. Penelope obeyed, the burn of the alcohol grounding her. You were magnificent, Wallace said, taking the chair opposite her. The way you stood up to them, the strength in your voice. I was proud of you. I could only do it because you were there, because I knew you would not let them take me, and I never will. The conviction in his voice made her eyes sting. This man, who had been a stranger less than a week ago, had become her protector, her defender, her husband. Wallace, she said quietly, what happens now? With us, I mean. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his grey eyes. Now we learn to live as husband and wife. We settle into our roles. We present a united front to society, and we hope that in time this arrangement becomes comfortable for both of us. Comfortable. The word felt inadequate for what Penelope was beginning to feel. Your rooms are prepared in the Duchess's wing, adjacent to mine, but with your own private space. You will have complete autonomy over your days, your activities, your life. And at night? The question escaped before she could stop it. Wallace's expression flickered with something that might have been longing before it was carefully controlled. At night, you will sleep in your own bed, undisturbed. This is a marriage of convenience, Penelope. I will not impose myself on you in that way. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they left Penelope feeling oddly hollow. She found herself wanting to ask what would happen if she did not want to be undisturbed. What would happen if the walls between their rooms felt more like barriers than protections? But she said none of this. Instead, she simply nodded and finished her brandy. Before we continue with how their marriage unfolds, I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying Penelope and Wallace's story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And here's something I'm curious about. If you were in Penelope's position, would you have accepted Wallace's proposal of convenience, or would you have chosen independence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers might just surprise you. That night, Penelope lay alone in the grand four-poster bed of the Duchess's chambers, staring at the canopy above her and listening to the sounds of Greyhaven settling into sleep. Somewhere beyond the adjoining door, Wallace was in his own room. So close, so impossibly far. She was safe now, protected, free from her uncle's control and Raymond's threats. Everything she had desperately wanted just days ago. So why did it feel like something was missing? Why did the careful distance Wallace maintained feel more like loneliness than respect? Penelope turned onto her side and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would begin learning how to be a duchess, how to manage a great estate, how to live beside a man who had saved her life but kept himself carefully guarded behind walls of propriety. And perhaps, if she was very brave, she might find a way through those walls to discover if the connection she felt between them was real or simply born of gratitude and proximity. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The fire burned low. And Penelope, Duchess of Wallace Grey, fell asleep, wondering if a marriage that began with such careful distance could ever become something more. The days that followed the wedding settled into a careful rhythm. Penelope learned her duties as Duchess under Mrs. Turner's patient guidance. She met with the cook about menus, reviewed household accounts, received calls from neighboring gentry who were curious about the new Duchess of Wallace Grey. Wallace remained courteous but distant. They breakfasted together each morning, conversing about estate matters and local news. They dined together each evening, the conversation polite and measured. And each night, they retired to their separate rooms with nothing more than a formal good night. But something was changing. Penelope felt it in the way Wallace's gaze lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, in the way his hand would brush hers when passing her a cup of tea, the contact lasting just a fraction longer than necessary, in the tension that filled the air between them whenever they were alone. She was not imagining it. She could not be. 3 weeks after the wedding, they attended a ball at a neighboring estate. It was their first public appearance as a married couple, and Penelope spent the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation. The dress that arrived from London was stunning, deep sapphire silk that brought out the green in her eyes, with a neckline that was modest yet elegant, showing just enough of her shoulders and collarbone to be fashionable. When she descended the stairs that evening, she found Wallace waiting in the entrance hall. He looked magnificent in formal evening dress, all dark elegance and aristocratic bearing. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he saw her. For a long moment, he simply stared. "You look beautiful," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you." Penelope felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "You look rather handsome yourself." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, there and gone too quickly for her to name. The ball was a glittering affair. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished floors. Music filled the air. Ladies in jewel-toned gowns moved through the rooms like exotic birds. Penelope found herself the object of intense curiosity. The new Duchess. The woman who had appeared from nowhere and captured one of England's most eligible bachelors. She felt the weight of countless eyes assessing her, judging her, wondering about her. Wallace stayed close, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back as he introduced her to various members of society. His touch burned through the thin silk of her gown, sending shivers down her spine. When the orchestra began a waltz, Wallace turned to her and offered his hand. "May I have this dance, Your Grace?" The formality of the request, coupled with the intensity in his eyes, made her pulse quicken. "You may." He led her onto the dance floor, one hand settling at her waist, the other clasping hers. As the music began, they moved together with a grace that surprised her. "You dance well," she observed. "My mother insisted on proper training." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Though I confess I have not enjoyed dancing in years, not until now." The admission sent warmth flooding through her. She looked up at him and found his grey eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. "Wallace," she said softly. "What are we doing?" "Dancing," he replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested he understood the real question she was asking. The music swelled around them. Wallace pulled her slightly closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to him, close enough that she could see the way his jaw tightened as if he was restraining himself from something. Every rule of propriety said they should maintain proper distance, but propriety felt like a cage in that moment, a barrier keeping them from something they both wanted but neither dared acknowledge. When the dance ended, they stood still for a heartbeat too long, neither wanting to step away. Then Wallace seemed to remember where they were, and he released her with careful formality. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Penelope." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and introductions, but Penelope remained acutely aware of Wallace, of the way his eyes found her across crowded rooms, of the possessive way he touched her arm or back whenever they were together, of the barely restrained tension in his shoulders whenever another man showed her attention. It was past midnight when they finally departed, settling into the carriage for the ride back to Greyhaven. The interior was dark and intimate, lit only by the swaying carriage lamp. "You handled yourself magnificently tonight," Wallace said after several minutes of charged silence. "Society will accept you without question. I am glad I did not embarrass you." "Embarrass me?" He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light she could see the intensity in his expression. "Penelope, you were the most captivating woman in that ballroom. Every man there envied me. Every woman there wondered how I had been fortunate enough to win you." "You did not win me," she said quietly. "You saved me. There is a difference." Wallace was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the touch both gentle and possessive. "Perhaps I did both," he said, his voice low and rough. "Perhaps the moment I found you hiding in my carriage, terrified and brave and desperately in need of help, perhaps that was the moment I began to fall." Penelope's breath caught. "Wallace, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that this marriage may have begun as convenience, but it has become something else entirely, at least for me." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am saying that I think about you constantly, that I lie awake at night knowing you are just beyond that door, so close and yet impossibly far, that every moment of restraint, every careful distance I maintain feels like torture. Then why maintain it?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Because I gave you my word. Because you married me for protection, not for this. Because I refuse to be another man who takes from you what you did not freely offer." The nobility of his words should have touched her, and they did. But they also frustrated her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Wallace," she said, leaning closer until their faces were mere inches apart. "What if I want to offer? What if I want those walls between us to come down?" She saw the war in his eyes, desire fighting with honor, want battling with restraint. "Penelope," he breathed, and there was so much longing in that single word that it made her ache. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jolting them apart. The moment broke. Wallace released her hand and moved back to his side of the carriage, jaw tight with tension. "We should not speak of this now," he said, though his voice was strained. "Not here. Not when I have spent the entire evening watching you move through that ballroom like something out of a dream. Not when all I want to do is pull you into my arms and show you exactly how much this marriage has come to mean to me." The raw honesty in his admission left Penelope breathless. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken desire and barely restrained need. When they arrived at Greyhaven, Wallace helped her down from the carriage. His hands lingered at her waist longer than strictly necessary. She looked up at him, seeing her own want reflected in his eyes. "Good night, Penelope," he said softly. "Good night, Wallace." She turned to go inside, but his voice stopped her. "Penelope." She looked back. "If you ever decide you want those walls to come down, All you need to do is ask. The choice will always be yours. Then he was striding away toward his study, leaving her standing in the entrance hall with her heart racing and her body aching with unfulfilled longing. Penelope climbed the stairs to her chambers in a daze. Her maid helped her out of the sapphire gown and into her nightdress. But long after the girl had left and the fire had burned low, Penelope sat by her window staring at the door that connected her room to Wallace's. All you need to do is ask. The words echoed in her mind. An invitation. A promise. A choice that was entirely hers to make. She thought about the way he had looked at her tonight. The way his touch had burned through her gloves. The way his voice had roughened when he admitted wanting her. The way every carefully maintained distance between them had begun to feel less like respect and more like denial of something beautiful and real. She thought about what Mrs. Collins had said. Give it time. I have seen the way His Grace looks at you. But Penelope was tired of time, tired of waiting, tired of sleeping alone in this grand bed when the man she had come to care for was just beyond that door, wanting her as much as she wanted him. The marriage had begun as convenience, as protection, as a practical arrangement between two people thrown together by desperate circumstances, but it had become so much more than that, and perhaps it was time to stop pretending otherwise. Penelope stood and moved to the connecting door. Her hand rested on the handle, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would be brave. Tomorrow she would knock on that door and tell Wallace Gray that she wanted those walls to come down, that she wanted to know what it meant to be truly married to him, that she was ready to turn this arrangement into something real. Tomorrow. But as she returned to her bed and lay staring at the canopy above her, she wondered if she would have the courage when morning came, or if fear would win again, keeping them apart in this careful dance of desire and restraint. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. The moon cast silver light through her windows, and somewhere beyond the connecting door, Wallace lay awake, thinking thoughts that mirrored her own, neither of them realizing how close they both were to breaking. Penelope woke the next morning with resolve burning in her chest. Today she would be brave. Today she would go to Wallace and tell him what she wanted, what they both wanted. She dressed with care in a simple day dress of soft lavender, letting her maid arrange her hair in loose curls. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman transformed from the terrified girl who had hidden in a carriage weeks ago. She looked like a duchess now. She felt like one. More importantly, she felt like a woman ready to claim her own happiness. She descended to breakfast to find Wallace already at the table, reading correspondence. He looked up when she entered, and something in his eyes told her he had slept as poorly as she had. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying that rough edge she had come to recognize as barely restrained desire. "Good morning, Wallace." They ate in charged silence, each acutely aware of the other. Every glance felt weighted with meaning. Every accidental touch of fingers passing the marmalade sent sparks through her skin. "Penelope," Wallace began, setting down his cup. "About last night." But whatever he meant to say was interrupted by Mrs. Turner hurrying into the room, her usually composed face pale with concern. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there has been an incident in the village. The baker's shop caught fire in the night. Several families have lost their homes in the surrounding buildings." Wallace was on his feet immediately. "How many injured?" "None seriously, thank God, but they need shelter and supplies." "Of course." He turned to Penelope. "I must go help coordinate the relief efforts. Will you be all right here?" "I will come with you," Penelope said firmly. "I am the Duchess. Those people are my responsibility too." Wallace looked at her for a long moment, something like pride warming his expression. "Then we go together." They spent the day in the village, Wallace organizing the men to contain the remaining embers, while Penelope worked with the women to find temporary shelter and distribute food and blankets. She moved among the displaced families with genuine compassion, listening to their stories, offering comfort where she could. Wallace watched her throughout the day, seeing her natural grace with the common people, her lack of pretension, her genuine care for those less fortunate. She was everything a duchess should be, everything he had not known he needed until she appeared in his life. They returned to Greyhaven late in the afternoon, both exhausted and covered in soot. Mrs. Turner fussed over them, insisting they both bathe and rest before dinner. Penelope soaked in a hot bath, washing away the grime of the day, her mind still full of the families they had helped. She was just stepping from the tub, wrapped in a towel, when she smelled it. Smoke. Not the pleasant scent of fireplace wood, something acrid and wrong. She threw on her dressing gown and opened her door to find the corridor filling with grey haze. Somewhere in the east wing, flames crackled and roared. "Fire!" she heard someone scream. "Fire in the house!" Penelope's heart seized with terror. She ran toward the stairs, but smoke was already thick in the hallway, burning her eyes and throat. She could hear shouting below, the sound of people rushing to evacuate, but the smoke was making it difficult to see, difficult to breathe. She turned back toward her room, thinking to reach the window, to call for help, but her vision was swimming. Her lungs burned. The world tilted sideways. She felt herself falling, felt the floor rush up to meet her, and then there was only darkness. Wallace was in his study reviewing reports when he smelled the smoke. He ran into the hallway to find servants rushing past with buckets of water, shouting about a fire in the east wing. The east wing, where Penelope's chambers were located. Terror unlike anything he had ever known gripped his heart. He ran toward the smoke, pushing past servants trying to evacuate, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The corridor was thick with grey haze, flames visible through an open doorway where something had caught and spread. "Penelope!" he shouted. "Penelope!" No answer. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and pushed forward through the smoke. Her door was closed. He tried the handle, found it unlocked, and threw it open. She was lying on the floor just inside, collapsed in her dressing gown, unconscious. No. The word tore from his throat like a prayer. No, no, no. He dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms. She was breathing, thank God, but shallowly. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue from lack of oxygen. "I have you," he said, though she could not hear him. "I have you, love. Stay with me." He lifted her, cradling her against his chest, and ran. Through the smoke, down the stairs, out into the blessed clean air of the garden, where servants had gathered. He laid her on the grass, his hands shaking as he touched her face. "Penelope, Penelope, please. Open your eyes." She coughed, a horrible rasping sound, but the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Wallace?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am here, you are safe. Just breathe." He was dimly aware that he was crying, that tears were streaming down his face, but he did not care. All that mattered was that she was alive, that she was breathing. Mrs. Turner appeared with blankets. The doctor was already being sent for. Wallace wrapped Penelope in the soft wool and lifted her again, carrying her away from the burning house to a clear space on the lawn. He sat with her cradled in his arms, rocking slightly, pressing his face to her hair. "When he thought I had lost you," he said, his voice breaking, "when I thought you might be gone, I realized that nothing else matters. Not propriety, not our agreement, not the careful walls we have built. None of it matters if you are not here." Penelope looked up at him, her smoke-reddened eyes finding his. "Wallace, do not speak yet. Just listen." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I love you, Penelope. I did not plan to, I did not expect to. But somewhere between finding you in my carriage and watching you comfort displaced families this afternoon, I fell completely and irrevocably in love with you." He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not care if this started as convenience. I do not care about the circumstances that brought us together. I care only that you are here, that you are safe, and that I cannot imagine a single day of my life without you in it." Penelope's hands came up to grip his coat, holding him close. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was going to tell you this morning. I was going to say that I do not want those walls anymore, that I want to be your wife in every way that matters." Wallace made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Then marry me again," he said. "Not as convenience, not as protection. Marry me because you want to, because you choose me, because we choose each other." "I already married you," she said, tears streaming down her own face now. "And I choose you, Wallace Gray. I choose you every day for the rest of my life." He kissed her then, desperately and tenderly all at once. His lips claimed hers with a hunger born of fear and love and desperate relief. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her emotion into that single connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wallace rested his forehead against hers again. "The house is burning," he said with a shaky laugh. "Half the servants are standing around watching us. And all I can think about is that I almost lost you before I ever told you how much you mean to me." "The fire is out," Mrs. Turner said quietly from nearby, having the grace to look away from their intimate moment. "The damage is contained to the East Wing storage rooms. Someone left oil lamps burning near old linens. It was an accident, nothing more, but Penelope barely heard her. She was looking at Wallace, seeing the man behind the careful control. The man who had just admitted he loved her. The man who had run through smoke and fire to save her. "Take me inside," she said softly. "Take me to your chambers. I do not want to spend another night behind separate doors." Wallace's eyes darkened with desire and something deeper. "Are you certain? After everything that just happened, I am more certain than I have ever been about anything." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I almost died today without ever truly being your wife. I will not make that mistake again." Wallace stood, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing. He carried her through the house, past servants who quickly averted their eyes, up the stairs to the master chambers. He laid her gently on his bed, then knelt beside it, taking her hands in his. "I will not rush you," he said quietly. "We have time now, all the time in the world." Penelope pulled him up beside her, her green eyes luminous in the lamplight. "Then do not rush. Show me. Teach me. Love me the way I have been dreaming about since that night in the carriage when you first touched my face." Wallace cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. "It would be my honor and privilege, Your Grace." And as twilight fell over Greyhaven Hall, as the last of the smoke cleared from the East Wing and the household settled into evening routines, Wallace and Penelope finally tore down every wall between them and discovered what it meant to be truly married, truly united, truly and completely in love. The room was bathed in soft golden light from the lamps and the fire crackling in the hearth. Wallace's chambers were larger than Penelope's had been, masculine and elegant with dark wood furniture and deep burgundy curtains, but all she could focus on was the man kneeling beside the bed, looking at her as if she were something precious and fragile. "Are you truly certain?" Wallace asked, his voice rough with restrained desire. "We do not have to do this tonight. You have been through an ordeal. You need rest." Penelope sat up and reached for him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. "Wallace, I have been certain since that night you tucked my hair behind my ear and looked at me like I mattered. I have been certain since you stood between me and my uncle. I have been certain since you admitted you think of me constantly. I do not need rest. I need you." Something in his expression shifted at her words, the careful control giving way to raw want. He stood and shrugged out of his coat, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the tension in his shoulders. His waistcoat followed, his cravat. Penelope watched, her breath coming faster with each layer he removed. When he was down to his shirt and trousers, he paused and looked at her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the sash of her dressing gown. "Yes." The word came out, breathless. He sat beside her on the bed and slowly untied the sash, his fingers brushing against the silk. The gown fell open, revealing the thin nightdress beneath. His eyes darkened as they traveled over her, but there was reverence in his gaze along with the desire. "You are beautiful," he murmured. "So beautiful it makes my chest ache." "Then do not just look," Penelope said softly. "Touch me." Wallace's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Then he leaned in and kissed her, slowly this time, thoroughly. His lips moved over hers with practiced skill, coaxing them open, deepening the kiss until she was clinging to him. His hand slid from her face down the column of her throat, fingers tracing her collarbone, making her shiver. He broke the kiss to press his lips to the sensitive spot just below her ear, and she gasped at the sensation. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like," he whispered against her skin. "Tell me if you want me to stop. Your pleasure and comfort matter more than anything else." "I will," she promised, her hands moving to the buttons of his shirt. "But Wallace, I need to touch you too. I need to feel you." He helped her with the buttons, shrugging out of the shirt and tossing it aside. Penelope stared at the expanse of his chest, the defined muscles, the warm skin. She placed her palms flat against him and felt his heart racing beneath her touch. "You are nervous," she observed with wonder. "Terrified," he admitted. "I want this to be perfect for you. I want to give you everything you deserve. You already have." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You saved my life, Wallace, in every way a person can be saved. This is just another way of showing each other what we already know." Wallace captured her mouth again, this time with less restraint. His hands moved over her body, learning the curves through the thin fabric of her nightdress. When his fingers found the hem and began to slide it upward, she lifted her arms to help him remove it. The cool air hit her skin, and she resisted the urge to cover herself. Wallace pulled back to look at her, his breathing ragged, his eyes burning with desire and adoration. "Perfect," he breathed. "You are absolutely perfect." He guided her back onto the pillows, his body covering hers but careful not to crush her with his weight. She felt the warmth of his skin against hers, the solid strength of him, and it sent heat pooling low in her belly. His lips found hers again as his hands explored her body with reverent touches, down her sides, across her stomach, learning every curve and hollow. When his fingers brushed the curve of her breast, she arched into the touch with a soft gasp. "Good?" he asked against her lips. "Yes." "More." He smiled against her mouth and obliged, his touch growing bolder but never rough. He mapped her body with his hands and lips, finding the places that made her gasp and sigh, committing them to memory. When he moved lower, pressing kisses down her throat to her collarbone and beyond, Penelope's fingers tangled in his hair. The sensations were overwhelming in the best possible way. She had never known her body could feel like this, could respond with such intensity to another person's touch. "Wallace," she breathed, "please, I need you." He raised his head to look at her, his grey eyes almost black with desire. "Are you ready for me?" "Yes. I have been ready since the moment I fell in love with you." He stood long enough to remove his remaining clothing, then returned to her, settling between her thighs. The weight of him felt right, felt like home. He braced himself on his forearms, caging her beneath him, but leaving her room to move, to breathe. "This may hurt at first," he warned gently. "If it does, tell me. We can stop. We can wait." "I trust you," Penelope said simply. "And I want this. I want you." He kissed her deeply as he began to enter her, moving slowly, giving her time to adjust. There was pressure, discomfort, but his lips on hers and the tender way he whispered her name made it bearable. She breathed through it, her hands gripping his shoulders. "All right?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of holding still. "Yes. Keep going." He moved carefully, inch by inch, until they were fully joined. They both went still, breathing hard, staring at each other in wonder at the intimacy of it. "You feel incredible," Wallace said, his voice rough. "Like you were made for me." "Perhaps I was," Penelope whispered. "Perhaps we were always meant to find each other." He began to move then, slowly at first, his eyes never leaving hers. The discomfort faded, replaced by a building pleasure that made her gasp and cling to him. He adjusted his angle and suddenly the sensation intensified, making her cry out. "There?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. "There," she confirmed breathlessly. He set a rhythm that had her arching beneath him, her body responding to his in ways she had never imagined. His lips found hers, swallowing her gasps and moans. His hands moved over her skin, touching, caressing, worshipping. The pleasure built and built, until Penelope felt like she might shatter from it. Her nails dug into Wallace's back as she chased something just out of reach, something her body knew how to find, even if her mind did not understand. "Let go," Wallace urged against her lips. "I have you. Let go, love." And she did, crying out his name as waves of pleasure crashed over her, leaving her trembling and gasping beneath him. Wallace followed moments later, his own release shuddering through him as he buried his face in her neck and groaned her name like a prayer. They collapsed together, hearts racing, skin damp with exertion. Wallace rolled to his side, pulling her with him so she was tucked against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, one hand stroking her hair with infinite tenderness. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am more than all right." Penelope pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I am happy, truly, completely happy." Wallace tightened his arms around her. "I love you," he said. "Not as a convenient wife, not as someone I saved, but as the woman who has become my entire world." "And I love you," she replied, "as the man who gave me not just protection, but partnership, not just safety, but love, not just shelter, but home." They lay together in comfortable silence, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, Greyhaven Hall settled into night, the crisis of the fire now past, the household safe and secure. Penelope traced lazy patterns on Wallace's chest, marveling at how different this felt from anything she had imagined when she first hid in his carriage. How far they had come from that desperate act to this moment of profound connection and love. "What are you thinking?" Wallace asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That I would hide in your carriage 1,000 times if it meant ending up here, in your arms, loved and free." Wallace chuckled softly. "And I would find you there every time, pull back that blanket, and fall in love with you all over again." She tilted her head up to look at him, her green eyes luminous in the firelight. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that no matter how many years pass, no matter how comfortable we become, we never forget this feeling, this choice we made to love each other." "I promise," Wallace said solemnly, "though I do not think I could forget even if I tried. This night, this moment, you in my arms, finally and completely mine as I am yours, this is etched into my soul forever." He kissed her again, tender and sweet this time, a seal on the promise. And as they drifted toward sleep, still tangled together, still unwilling to let go, both of them knew that what had started as desperate convenience had transformed into something extraordinary. A marriage built not on obligation, but on choice. Not on necessity, but on love. Not on what they needed from each other, but on what they wanted to give. The weeks that followed were the happiest Penelope had ever known. She woke each morning in Wallace's arms, spent her days managing the estate and helping local families, and fell asleep each night with her husband's heartbeat beneath her ear. The careful distance that had once defined their marriage was replaced with easy affection, stolen kisses in the library, and the comfortable intimacy of two people who had chosen each other completely. They walked the grounds hand in hand each evening, discussing plans for improvements to tenant cottages and expansions to the village school. Wallace consulted her on estate matters, valuing her opinions and insights. She discovered he had a dry wit that emerged when they were alone, making her laugh in ways she never had before. Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Collins exchanged knowing glances whenever they saw the Duke and Duchess together. The entire household could feel the shift, the warmth that now filled Greyhaven Hall, where once there had been only formal propriety. One morning in early autumn, they were breakfasting together when the post arrived. Wallace sorted through the correspondence, his expression growing darker with each envelope he opened. "What is it?" Penelope asked, setting down her teacup. Wallace handed her a formal document, his jaw tight. "Raymond is contesting the marriage. He has filed with the ecclesiastical court claiming I coerced you while you were still under your uncle's guardianship. He is seeking to have our marriage annulled." Penelope's hand trembled as she read the legal language. "But that is absurd. I married you of my own free will. We have witnesses. He knows that." Wallace's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath it. "This is about intimidation, about trying to drag us through scandal and scrutiny. He wants to paint you as incompetent, unable to make your own decisions, exactly as he and your uncle originally planned." "Then we fight him," Penelope said firmly. "We show the court exactly what kind of man he is, what he intended to do to me." Wallace reached across the table and took her hand. "It will not be pleasant. You will have to testify. You will have to recount everything in front of magistrates and lawyers. They will question your judgment, your sanity, your character. I do not care." She met his eyes with steel in her own. "I will not let him destroy what we have built. I will not let him take this from us." Pride and love warmed Wallace's expression. Then we prepare for battle. Over the following days, Wallace assembled his legal team. His solicitor gathered evidence, records of Raymond's previous wives' deaths, documentation of suspicious financial transactions, testimonies from servants who had witnessed troubling behaviors. Mrs. Collins was interviewed extensively about what she had overheard that night before the wedding. Investigators discovered even more damning information. Raymond had significant debts. He had been counting on Penelope's inheritance to save him from financial ruin. When that plan failed, desperation had driven him to this legal challenge, hoping to either force an annulment or destroy the Grey family's reputation enough to pressure a settlement. The hearing was set for a cold morning in London. Penelope dressed with care in a modest gown of dove grey, her hair styled simply, every inch the respectable duchess. Wallace wore formal court dress, his bearing aristocratic and commanding. The courtroom was imposing, all dark wood and solemn paintings of religious figures. The ecclesiastical judge sat elevated behind his bench, an elderly man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Raymond and his lawyer occupied one side of the room. Uncle Henry sat behind them, his face flushed and angry. Wallace and Penelope entered together, and she felt every eye in the room assess her. Was she mad? Coerced? The foolish victim Raymond's lawyer would try to paint her as. Raymond's lawyer spoke first, presenting a narrative of a vulnerable young woman manipulated by a powerful duke. He suggested Wallace had taken advantage of her distressed state, that the marriage had been rushed and improper, that Penelope had not been of sound mind to consent. It was masterfully done, painting her as weak and Wallace as predatory, twisting the facts just enough to create doubt. Then it was their turn. Wallace's solicitor methodically dismantled Raymond's case. He presented the timeline. Penelope fleeing on her wedding day, hiding in the Duke's carriage, the 3 days Wallace gave her to prove her story before offering marriage. He showed how Wallace had investigated independently, how he had sought legal counsel, how every step had been proper and documented. Then Mrs. Collins took the stand. The elderly governess was visibly nervous in the formal setting, but her voice was steady as she recounted what she had heard that night. The planning, the bribed doctors, the asylum arrangements, the cold discussion of how to divide Penelope's inheritance once she was safely locked away. By the time she finished, several people in the courtroom were looking at Raymond and Henry with open disgust. Then came the testimony about Raymond's previous marriages. A former servant came forward to describe how the First Lady Raymond had been perfectly healthy until she began complaining about severe stomach pains after meals, how she had died within weeks, writhing in agony, how Raymond had shown no grief, only satisfaction when the will was read. Another witness, a stable master from Raymond's second wife's estate, testified about the suspicious circumstances of her riding accident, how the horse had been found with a wound on its flank, consistent with being struck, how Lady Raymond had been an experienced horsewoman unlikely to fall, how Raymond had again inherited everything. The judge's expression grew grimmer with each testimony. Finally, Penelope was called to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, acutely aware of Wallace's steady gaze supporting her. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Raymond's lawyer approached her with a patronizing smile. "Lady Penelope, you fled your wedding in a state of obvious distress. You hid in a stranger's carriage like a common criminal. Do these sound like the actions of a rational woman?" Penelope met his eyes calmly. "They sound like the actions of a desperate woman who had just learned her guardian and intended husband planned to have her declared insane and locked away so they could steal her inheritance. I would call that quite rational given the circumstances, but you have no proof of this alleged conspiracy beyond the testimony of a dismissed servant. Mrs. Collins was dismissed without cause, precisely to isolate me from anyone who might help. That is part of the pattern of control and manipulation I had been subjected to for years." The lawyer's smile tightened. "You claim the Duke of Wallace Grey married you out of nobility. Is it not more likely he saw an opportunity to acquire a fortune through you?" Penelope's voice was steady and clear. "The Duke had legal documents drawn up before our marriage, ensuring I maintained complete control of my inheritance. He has never touched a penny of it. He married me to protect me, yes, but also because we fell in love. And I married him because I chose to, freely and gladly, as is my right as an adult woman of sound mind." She turned to look directly at the judge. "Your Honor, Lord Raymond Hale wants this court to believe I am incapable of making my own decisions, that I need male guardianship to function, but I have managed the affairs of Greyhaven Hall these past months. I have overseen charitable works in the village. I have handled complex household accounts and social obligations. I have done everything expected of a duchess, and I have done it well. The only thing I am incapable of is allowing men like Raymond Hale and my uncle to control and exploit me." The courtroom was silent. Raymond's face had gone from confident to pale. Wallace's solicitor stood for his final statement. "Your Honor, this case is not about the validity of a marriage. It is about a desperate man attempting to use the legal system to punish a woman who escaped his control. Lord Raymond Hale planned to imprison an innocent woman for profit. When that failed, he attempted to destroy her happiness out of spite. The evidence is overwhelming. The marriage between the Duke and Duchess of Wallace Grey is entirely legal, proper, and based on mutual consent and affection. We ask that you dismiss this petition and recommend that Lord Raymond Hale face criminal investigation for his actions." The judge was silent for a long moment, reviewing his notes. Then he looked up, his expression stern. "I have heard enough. The petition for annulment is denied. The marriage between the Duke of Wallace Grey and Lady Penelope Grey is found to be entirely legal and valid. Furthermore, I am deeply disturbed by the evidence presented regarding Lord Raymond Hale's conduct. I am recommending this matter be forwarded to the criminal courts for investigation into potential fraud, conspiracy, and the suspicious deaths of his previous wives." He turned his sharp gaze to Raymond. "Lord Hale, you have wasted this court's time with a frivolous suit, motivated by greed and vindictiveness. You will pay all court costs, and I suggest you pray that the criminal investigation finds nothing to charge you with." The gavel came down with finality. Penelope felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Wallace was at her side immediately, pulling her into his arms despite the impropriety of embracing in court. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "You are safe. We are safe." Uncle Henry fled the courtroom without looking back. Raymond stood frozen, his face a mask of fury and defeat, as constables approached to discuss the coming investigation. Outside the courthouse, Wallace helped Penelope into their carriage. As soon as the door closed, she threw her arms around him. "We won," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually won." "You won," Wallace corrected, cupping her face in his hands. "You stood up there and showed them exactly who you are. Strong, intelligent, brave. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life." He kissed her deeply, pouring all his relief and love and admiration into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, Penelope rested her forehead against his. "Can we go home now? Back to Greyhaven, back to our life?" Wallace smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Yes, love. Let us go home." Winter arrived at Greyhaven Hall with soft snow that blanketed the gardens and frosted the windows with delicate patterns. 6 months had passed since the trial, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary all at once. Penelope stood at the window of the morning room, one hand resting on her gently rounded stomach, watching Wallace cross the lawn with his estate steward. Even from this distance, she could see him laugh at something the man said, his entire bearing so different from the rigid Duke who had first pulled back that carriage blanket and found her trembling beneath it. "Your Grace," Mrs. Collins said softly from behind her, "the seamstress is here for your fitting. Thank you, Mrs. Collins." Penelope turned with a smile. The former governess had become her closest companion at Greyhaven, part lady's companion, part trusted advisor, and entirely beloved friend. The months since the trial had brought unexpected peace. Raymond had fled to the continent ahead of his criminal investigation, leaving behind debts and scandal. Uncle Henry had retreated to his own estate, his reputation destroyed, his influence gone. The inheritance sat safely in Penelope's control, and she had used portions of it to fund improvements to tenant housing and establish a school for village children. But the greatest change had come in December, when Penelope realized her monthly courses had stopped and her body was beginning to shift in subtle ways. The doctor had confirmed what her heart already knew. She was carrying Wallace's child. Wallace had wept when she told him, actually wept with joy, holding her close and whispering thank you over and over, as if she had given him the greatest gift imaginable. The seamstress took measurements for new gowns to accommodate her changing figure, chattering cheerfully about how beautiful the Duchess looked, with the bloom of pregnancy on her cheeks. When she finally left, Penelope found Wallace waiting in the library. Papers spread before him, but his attention clearly elsewhere. "How are you feeling?" he asked immediately, rising to pull her into his arms. "Wonderful. Tired, but wonderful." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then knelt before her, placing both hands on her stomach with infinite gentleness. "And how is our little one?" "Growing, making me hungry at odd hours and dizzy when I stand too quickly." Wallace looked up at her with such love it made her breath catch. "You are so beautiful like this. Carrying our child, building our family. Sometimes I still cannot believe how fortunate I am." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair. "I am the fortunate one. You saved me, Wallace, in every possible way." "We saved each other," he corrected, standing and pulling her close again. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a title and an estate. You made me want to live, not just exist." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Turner entered with her usual efficiency. "Your Grace, the guests are beginning to arrive for the winter ball." Penelope and Wallace had decided to host Greyhaven's first ball in years, a celebration not just of the season, but of their marriage, their happiness, their future. The house had been decorated with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. The ballroom gleamed with candlelight. The kitchens had been preparing for days. That evening, Penelope descended the grand staircase in a gown of deep blue velvet, her pregnancy just beginning to show, a radiant smile on her face. Wallace waited at the bottom, resplendent in formal dress, his eyes shining with pride as he watched her approach. The ballroom filled with guests, neighbors, and friends who had come to celebrate with the Duke and Duchess. Music played, champagne flowed. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. At the height of the evening, Wallace called for silence. The room stilled, all eyes turning to where he stood with Penelope at his side. "Many of you have asked how the Duchess and I came to marry," he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "The truth is both simple and extraordinary. One morning, a desperate young woman made a choice to save herself. She hid in my carriage, terrified and brave in equal measure. I could have turned her away, I could have refused to help, but something in her eyes, in her courage, made me want to protect her." He turned to look at Penelope, his expression tender. "What I did not know then was that she would save me just as surely as I saved her, that this marriage of convenience would become the greatest love of my life, that the woman hiding beneath that blanket would become my partner, my confidant, my reason for everything." He raised his glass, "To the Duchess, to the child she carries, to the family we are building, and the love that grows stronger with each passing day. And to the reminder that sometimes the most desperate moments lead us exactly where we are meant to be." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Penelope felt tears streaming down her face as Wallace kissed her in front of everyone, claiming her openly and proudly. Later, when the guests had departed and the house had quieted, they stood together in the nursery that was being prepared on the third floor. The walls had been painted a soft yellow. A cradle sat near the window, carved from dark wood and lined with white linen. Wallace wrapped his arms around Penelope from behind, his hands covering hers on her stomach. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "A boy or a girl? I do not care, as long as the baby is healthy, though I suspect Mrs. Turner is hoping for a boy to carry on the Grey name. And you? What are you hoping for?" Penelope leaned back against him. "I am hoping for a child who knows love, who grows up in a home full of laughter and warmth instead of cold calculation, who never doubts they are wanted and cherished." Wallace pressed his face to her neck. "They will have all of that and more, I promise you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching snow fall past the window, imagining the child who would soon fill this room with life. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Penelope asked. "About what would have happened if you had discovered me and simply left me at that inn?" "All the time," Wallace admitted, "and every time I thank God that I did not, that I chose to help you, that you chose to trust me, that we chose each other. Penelope turned in his arms to face him. I would do it all again, every frightening moment, every desperate decision. I would hide in your carriage 1,000 times if it meant ending up here, with you, with this life we have built. Wallace kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. And I would find you every single time. Sometimes love arrives not in ballrooms or carefully arranged courtships, but in moments of pure desperation. Penelope Hart hid in a stranger's carriage to escape a fate worse than death, and found instead a man who would become her whole world. She learned that true strength is not about never being afraid, but about being brave enough to save yourself. That home is not a place but a person who sees you, protects you, and chooses to love you every single day. And as snow fell over Greyhaven Hall that winter evening, as the Duke and Duchess held each other in the nursery of their future child, both of them understood that the most beautiful love stories often begin with the most desperate escapes. Because sometimes, hiding from your fate leads you straight to your destiny. If this story touched your heart, I would love for you to leave a like. It helps more people find these stories of courage and love. And please subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey like Penelope and Wallace's. Finally, I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening to this story right now? Drop your location in the comments. Knowing that these words travel across continents and connect us all makes every story worth telling. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until the next story, take care of your heart.